Okay, good morning and good afternoon and good evening, everyone. I'm David Winickoff. I am part of the organizing group and help run the working party on bio, nano, and converging technologies. It's my pleasure to introduce this short rapporteur session, whose purpose is to allow people who were not able to attend the other two sessions to hear a bit about what happened and to connect the dots a little bit across these three panels and with the workshop as a whole. The panels included harnessing responsible neurotechnology for brain health. This will be rapporteured by Marcello Ienca from the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology. Second will be realizing net carbon neutrality, the role of carbon management technologies, which will be chaired by Innovation Norway, by Ole Marvik. And third, the Innovating Global Health, collaborative action where markets fail. Here, Mark Bale was unfortunately not able to join us at the last minute, so I'm happy to fill in for Mark. And I just want to, before we begin, reiterate what Doug said towards the end of his talk, that the purpose of these panels is to get more specific about certain technologies and the challenges of the development of technologies for societal challenges. And in each panel, there was a distinct technology and a distinct social, political, and ethical challenge. So with that, I'd like to hand over to Marcello Ienca for panel 2A.
Thank you very much, Dr. Winickoff, and hello, everyone. My name is Marcello Ienca. I am an academic bioethicist based at the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology in Lausanne, Switzerland. And it is my honor and pleasure to report on panel 2A, entitled Harnessing Responsible Neurotechnology for Brain Health, which was formidably moderated by Siobhan O'Sullivan. So it is hard to do justice of the extremely rich and insightful discussions of this panel in just 5 minutes. So I invite all those who could not attend the panel to view the recordings that will be made available in the coming days. However, I believe the following main thematic areas and discussion points can be identified. First and foremost, as highlighted by Professor Hervé Schneeweis, neurotechnology innovation is essential to alleviate the global burden of disorders of the mind and brain, and thereby improve the lives of hundreds of millions of people worldwide who suffer from neurological and psychiatric disorders, such as Alzheimer's disease and depression, thereby delaying the delivery of such much needed technological innovation is not a morally and societally acceptable option. And there seems to be some convergence among the panelists on this point. But at the same time, we need to accelerate neurotechnology innovation to maximize its benefits for society, while at the same time minimizing its risk for individuals and communities. And so our panelists also discuss in detail the emerging ethical challenges and societal challenges in this domain. Panelists seem to agree that one-size-fits-all approaches to neurotechnology governance are unlikely to be effective. And in contrast, they supported what was labeled during the panel as a multi-level governance approach, which involves at least 4 levels of governance. First, self-regulation by industry actors. Among others, Diane Saville and Gabriel Villafuerte emphasized the importance of establishing best practices and a culture of stewardship within the neurotechnology sector. Second, soft law governance, of which the OECD recommendation on responsible innovation in neurotechnology is the new international benchmark in the field. The third level of governance is fundamental rights. And here again, there was some strong convergence within the group on the importance of addressing the emerging ethical challenges of neurotechnology in terms of fundamental rights, otherwise called neuro rights when applied to the brain and mind domain. And these rights ought to be considered at the level of international treaties. And this includes the right to privacy, the right to cognitive liberty, and the right to freedom of thought. And to this regard, Professor Schneeweis informed the audience about the upcoming work of the UNESCO's International Bioethics Committee in this domain. And finally, the fourth level is public engagement and empowerment. When developing such multi-level governance framework, panelists agreed that four main considerations need to be considered. First, as emphasized by Dr. Kellmeyer, the brain is not just a biological organ, but also a sociocultural one. And therefore, he emphasized how socioeconomic inequalities and structural injustices are major obstacles that ought to be removed to achieve the truly equitable and inclusive brain health. Second, as emphasized by Dr. Taruna Dua from WHO, brain health is a global public health issue. Hence, the challenges above need to be addressed from a global perspective. And from this point of view, as emphasized by Gabriel Villafuerte, fair access to the benefits of neurotechnology is a primary social responsibility. Third, Dr. Kellmeyer emphasized that governance initiatives need to resolve current domain-specific asymmetries in neurotechnology regulation, in particular between the highly regulated medical neurotechnology domain and the loosely regulated consumer neurotechnology field. And fourth and last, panelists emphasized that governance initiatives should focus not exclusively on the development of guidelines or other normative instruments, but also on their effective implementation. And with regard to this, I would like to stress as a concluding remark that the OECD recommendation on responsible innovation in neurotechnology is very sensitive to this need to move beyond mere guideline development. And in fact, the steering group is now devoting most attention to the implementation of the recommendation at the national level, working together with multiple stakeholders groups in an inclusive manner. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Marcello, for that concise and very useful summary of the rich discussion in panel 2A on neurotechnology and brain health. We now turn over to Ole Marvik for the recounting of the panel on carbon management and net zero challenges. Ole?
So thank you, David. So my name is Ole Marvik from Innovating Norway, and it's my privilege to report from the second panel. And as David says, this is on carbon management technologies. It's a very wide topic, it's a very challenging topic to report on. And as Marcello also mentioned, I can't possibly do justice to everything that was mentioned in this panel in 5 minutes. But what I would like to highlight as a start is that the panelists started by pointing to the fact that it's not carbon that's the challenge, but the emission of carbon to the atmosphere. And that has a lot of bearings on the discussions of this topic. It's also not a lack of knowledge, but we are here facing in society a lot of conflicting interests. So we need to be clear about what we are talking about. And these interests are not only on the part of the industry, but also on social aspects and society interests. So for the communities and people in general, energy prices and job security, for instance. So for governments to set up good policies in the area of carbon management is all about creating a realistic political pathways that will achieve political acceptance. Strong measures are needed, but governments need to have a holistic approach, and they have a large toolbox. They need to use the whole toolbox for this. So they should also develop certain imperatives that will complement the climate action related to environmental consequences and also to energy security. And also the panelists were very concerned that policies in carbon management and climate action should not only provide restrictions, but also opportunities to ensure that you have public acceptance for these policies. Now, and they also mentioned, importantly, differences between industrialized and developing countries and how this should be taken care of and being considered in carbon management policies. For instance, building an energy infrastructure for the new renewable energy system. Now, they also mentioned several dilemmas and trade-offs that's part of this. Carbon or negative emissions is important for the IEA scenarios and targets of net zero emission in 2050. But when we are talking about negative emissions, that requires technologies which are still immature and needs to scale. So a huge challenge is to ensure that you have implementation or at a very large scale of new technologies. Another important aspect here is when you are using CCS related technologies, carbon capture and storage, it's important that these technologies are not slowing other and more deeper and profound changes in the industry. So there should be a wise policy policies to ensure that these are reserved for hard to abate sectors, as they're called. Another dilemma is that we need carbon also for products that are based on carbon. So we heard about the Renewable Carbon Initiative to point to the importance of creating carbon for products like chemical products, lubricants, polymers, and so on. So in this respect, we need perhaps to complement bioresources with recycling and direct air capture of carbon. And again, this is also important, but also filled with conflict or with dilemmas, for instance, related to the energy consumption needed for carbon recycling and DAC. So all in all, policies here, to summarize here, I think the key point is that the main takeaway is we need a holistic approach. There is no magic bullet, that was explicitly said. It seems clear that the climate challenge calls for huge transition of the industry, and it must happen very quickly. So we need to create a sense of urgency. Government's role is to have a holistic approach to deal with dilemmas and trade-offs with different sustainability objectives. And finally, they need to secure public acceptance for strong measures needed and also to steer investments in this direction. So thank you.
Thank you, Ole. It's a lot of pressure because those were very nice, concise reviews of the two panels. There's not too much time left, but I'll make a few comments on the rich discussion that occurred on the third panel on health innovation, where markets fail. We heard a number of keywords come up repeatedly in terms of what we have to figure out in order to deliver products like vaccines, antibiotics, diagnostics, where there are unmet needs. We heard a lot about collaboration and the kinds of collaboration across sectors, public, private, NGO, patient groups, payers, health system actors, to put together the right kind of ecosystem to bring forward the kinds of products that we need. We heard challenges of science. Science is lacking, but science is lacking is only one small part of a larger problem of generating access to these medicines and products. There are supply chain problems, there are market insufficiencies, there are regulatory reforms that are required, there are issues of public acceptability. All of these are challenges that need to be overcome if we want to deliver greater access. And we heard definitions of access, the need for more clear definitions of access We heard one in terms of actualization, availability, and acceptability. On collaboration, we heard about the need for pre-competitive infrastructures, of pooling IP and data, the need to generate evidence together. We heard about the need to de-risk investment, and also to generate greater social input investment as well. We heard about delinking the market using subscription models in the context of COVAX and antibiotics. We heard about innovative licensing structures from the Right Fund and other entities. Above all, again, we heard the need for experimental platforms, and we heard about how the IMI and IHI have developed a number of models and mechanisms to push forward these ecosystems. Finally, we also heard about what approaches might be needed for future work by groups like the OECD or others, not necessarily generating new models, but to understand what approaches have worked, to characterize and analyze them for actors. And we heard above all as well that it's perhaps even more than these other elements, a commitment to a shared goal, which will be necessary to achieve the kinds of innovations we need where there are unmet needs. And I think this works very well with this set of panels where we're talking about mission-driven innovation and the role of emerging technologies therein. And health innovation is an area that has rallied a lot of diverse actors together to develop and implement and diffuse emerging technologies. So thank you, and with that, we will move to the next panel called Setting Goals and Agendas Through Foresight and Participatory Process. We look forward to seeing you there. Thank you so much.